When I first started with Blender, I wanted to do some flashing lights, and I couldn't find anyone anywhere to tell me how to do them, and it still seems to be the case. So I thought I'd just share with you the method that I've found, and today we're going to produce like a big supercomputer with loads of flashing lights on it, just to show you how easy flashing lights are, and we'll also do a bit of modelling. So the first thing I'm going to do is squeeze up the little default cube there in the centre. That's going to be like a sort of computer tower for our supercomputer. Then we'll go into edit mode and we'll add a bit of detail, and I'm going to make it a bit the same sort of shape as in cross section as a kitchen cabinet, so it's got a plinth at the bottom and a bit that sticks out, if you know what I mean. So we'll start off by putting 2 loop cuts, 3 loop cuts, yeah, that should do. And then we'll hit Control and Tab, and we'll change to selecting faces. There we go. Now, you want to extrude these faces, and just moving it ain't going to work, because if you just move it, the faces at the top and bottom of it will try and come with it, like that. And the thing is that in reality, if you try and extrude it inwards, you can't, because you've got the 2 faces on the outside, but you can extrude it outwards, okay. So rather than try and extrude a face inwards, the thing to remember when you're modelling something like this is that unless you're going to scale it down and like kind of make a frame around the outside, you need to extrude things outwards. So I'm just going to hit Ctrl Z a couple of times and get rid of that. So what we want to do is we want to select the top, and the one up from the bottom, we'll extrude them towards us, and that'll leave us with a recess panel in the middle and a kind of plinth at the bottom, like that. And if I pulled the middle one out as well, it'd be a sort of kitchen cupboard shape. That's sort of what I meant. And what we're going to do is we're going to put some switches on the bottom panel, which naturally will also light up, and we're going to put some little round LEDs on the top panel. And that will be really the extent of our modelling, and I'm going to throw a logo on there later, which I'm going to pull from another project of mine, just because nearly all computers have some sort of logo at the top. And I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the middle like a kind of finned radiator sort of thing, just to add a bit of visual interest. So I'm starting off with a cylinder and scaling it down, and just pull it out from where it's hidden itself. And I'm going to get rid of the back half of it, because that's not going to be seen. And the thing with Blender is it tries to cover everything, even sometimes stuff that you can't see. So getting rid of these vertices that are never even going to be seen definitely makes a lot of sense, especially since, as you're going to see at the end of this, I'm going to use this whole computer case in an array and kind of make an arc of them, so it'll end up as a sort of supercomputery looking thing. Now if you do yours and you want to do one like this as well, you can put all sorts of other gizmos on there as well. In general, the more detailed you can make it, the more convincing it will look. You can put grills on there, you can put dials, you name it. You can even put a small TV screen and play a video in it. But for now, I'm just going to do a static thing, because we don't want the whole of this tutorial to be about modelling. we want to show you how to make some flashing lights. So that's going to end up as one vein, if you like, on the grill of our computer. It's going to be like a semicircular vein. So when I turn on smooth shading, then it will look more semicircular than faceted. And I need to free it up from the main model. I need to create a separate object, which I've just done by selecting it in Edit, hitting P and splitting it into its component parts, and restore the geometry and scale it. Now we'll just get it into the right position and get it the right size, and then we'll use the array modifier to produce a stack of them, so there'll be like a stack of semicircular fins. And they'll kind of fill up that middle recessed slot bit and poke out a little bit as well. It just gives a bit of extra sort of dimensional interest to it. Of course, you don't have to do this, you can do anything you like. You can put a grill there, you can put whatever your imagination says ought to be there. Glowing tubes or whatever. Right, go into modifiers. This is why I wanted to make it a separate object. For two reasons. One, it makes the material selections easier in a minute, and arrays. Obviously, if it was still a part of the case, you'd have to array the whole case, which wouldn't look rather weird. Right, that's got that set up. We'll just increase the count until it fills up the gap. Well, that looks good. Yeah, quite like that. So we'll apply that. And those are all now the same object. So if I go and make them a chrome, so what I'm going to do is rename that as Chrome in a minute, and turn the specularity right the way up, and make it slightly blue, and turn the mirror on, turn the reflectivity not quite all the way up, sort of 0.8, 0.9, and make the reflections slightly bluer. And that then gives you usually a convincing chrome, like that. Okay, so we've got chrome fins, very flash. Better change the name of the material to chrome. Great. Okay, now the next thing we want is some buttons to go on the bottom at the front. I'm going to make those, surprisingly, from a cube, but we don't want it that big, so we'll pull it forward, scale it down, and get rid of the back face again, the one that doesn't show. You'll find if you do this scene the way that I do it, at the end it will take a reasonable time to render because there's a lot in it. So every face you can delete does make a difference, even if it's the single one on the back of a cube. And that's how it'll fit in, but obviously smaller. Okay. Let's get rid of that face time. It's better. And now we're going to use a bevel modifier on it. And as you can see, you can turn up the amount of bevel to a sane amount, so it looks good. Oops, change to object mode before we apply it. Okay, and there you've got a beveled button top. Now it's just a question of getting it to the right size and getting it in the right place. And we can apply an array to that as well. Now there's a reason with these arrays that I'm applying them, and that's because we need the objects to be, well, we need the meshes to be separate so that we can apply different materials to them. Because even though something is the same colour, it's going to have a different material applied to it, and that's how we sort out what flashes and what doesn't, as you will see very shortly. So I'm going to have a row, don't know, 5 buttons wide, don't know, 3 deep, 4 deep, something like that. 3, I think. Right, and apply a second modifier to do the vertical. Oops, 1 row too many. Turn that down to 3. There, that's fine. That looks good. That looks like a buttons. Yep. Okay. That looks fine. And the next thing we'll do is put some little LEDs at the top there. We're going to make those out of cylinders. Actually, no, we're not. I just thought, because I'm worried about how many faces, we're going to make it as a cube, and we're going to apply the bevel modifier to the cube, but far more aggressively than we did for the switch, and that'll make it look like a cylinder from a little distance, especially since it's only going to be a little LED anyway. Tiny little thing. So get that scaled about right. So this is something where we need to get the scale about right before we apply the bevel, I believe. And we need to delete the rear. Need to delete the rear face actually, so I'll scale it back up and get rid of that rear face. Yep. Scale it down. Actually keep it to a size where we can see it and bevel it, and then and there we go. As you can see, what we've produced is a sort of 3-dimensional octagon shape, so it does sort of belly out in the middle. And scale that right the way down until it disappears in the box. Haha. Pull it forward a bit. Yeah, somewhere about that size. Something like that. Right, let me see. Something like a 5x5 array, maybe? Let's see what it looks like. Ah, 6. I'll scale the first LED down a bit. Look, that's going to be impressive. Loads of flashing lights. That's how we roll here. Flashing lights. So that's 9 wide. I wonder how many we'll get in the other direction. Let's have a go. That's interesting. Goes the wrong way. Change the sign on that. So another go. Yep. 9 by 9. I think that's going to be enough flashing lights to give anyone a headache. And then that leaves us a gap at the top we can put a logo in a minute. Okay. Let's go into the case. We'll put a material on the case. And I'm going to make it sort of a black metal. I've got a scuffed copper texture somewhere I'm going to put on there just to give it a bit of depth. That's interesting. I'm wondering how I managed to make that cube chrome. Managed to make the case chrome, but never mind, soon fix that. Okay. I'm just going to leave that as it is at the moment, and I'll import my copper texture. The case isn't going to be copper, it's just that there's some quite nice scratches and bits and pieces on this image, so I'm going to use it more for altering the normal and bump mapping than anything else. I just often find, did I call it copper? Yeah, I did. There it is. I just often find that anything that's metal, if it's not got some sort of a stressed effect on it or used effect on it, it just doesn't look right. It just looks like a piece of plastic. So I always try and put a texture on it, and I always try and use a little tiny bit of the colour from the texture. If I was doing this properly, I'd UV unwrap it, but really I'm trying to show you flashing lights and not modelling or UV unwrapping or anything else. We just need to get to a certain stage before I can get to the stage where I'll start doing the lights. While I'm not a complete perfectionist, I do like to have certain standards, you know. Okay, not enough light. And of course camera view is all wrong, but never mind. What we're going to do is go in and apply our arrays now. Just check that, yeah, that's okay. And now if we go into edit mode, hit P and separate parts. And now each one of those is a separate mesh, which lets it have a separate material, and that's important because that's how we do the flashing lights. Right. Now each one of those is actually now a separate object, and I'm going to leave them as objects at the moment because it makes material allocation much easier. And for this button panel here, I'm actually going to have 3 different materials, although they'll all end up looking the same. They're all going to end up looking like this first material, which is going to be an off-white sort of creamy colour, sort of colour that silicon keypads that are meant to be white often are. And yeah, specularity is down, and I'll put an emit value of 3, and I've just changed it to button 1. The material name is now button 1. So that's our first button material. And here we come to the first discussion about how flashing lights work. Now I'm going to go around some of the other buttons, and I'm going to give them that same material, the button 1 material. And the way we make the lights flash is we use a different tool in the graph view to actually manipulate the emit value, which controls how the material seems to be emitting light, so it makes the material act as a lamp. If you remember, I had it set at 3, so by varying that backwards and forwards between 3 and 1, 3 and 0, we can actually turn the lights in these switches on and off. And by having 3 different materials, we can have 3 groups of switches that turn on and off together. So it's sort of like a pattern. So not all of the switches don't turn off at the same time, although they might do, as you'll see later on. It depends on how the waveforms that are used to animate them stack up. So this is our second button material that's gone in. I'm now changing the, allocating that material to the other buttons. This is our third button material. I'm going to make it a greenish shade. In a minute I'm going to go back and edit these materials so they all look the same colour. But for my reference at the moment, it's easier for me to see which are which if I put a slight colour on them. That's only a temporary thing, so I can have a look on the panel and say, yeah, that looks about the right sort of distribution. And you sort of like got a mental idea of what it'll look like when it flashes on and off. So now I'm just going to go around and allocate the rest of the buttons to my third material, and if it looks okay to me, then I'll leave it like that. If it doesn't, then I might put in different materials. You know, I might swap them around a bit, make a different pattern. And there we go. Well, that doesn't look too bad. So what I'll do now is I'll go into those materials, and the ones that are slightly red, and the one that's slightly red, and the one that's slightly green, and I'll make them all the same sort of off-white yellowy sort of colour as the first one. They probably still look slightly different, but not as different as they are now. And that slightly different look, incidentally, isn't a bad thing, because nothing in this world ever comes out exactly the same colour except for the border around your TV set and really plasticky things. In the real world, things are very often very slightly different shades. So that's the material set up on there. So now we want to do the same thing for our light. So I'm going to have 3 different colours of lights, a sort of bluey white, a red and a green. So I'm going to do exactly the same, except this time the top value is going to be something like 5 for the emit. So when I make materials, I'm going to set them to 5. So I've applied the array, I've gone into edit, I've separated them out as parts. Here's the first LED material going in. LED blue 1 that should be. There's going to be 2 different materials for each colour, so that's 6 materials in all. You could do more on yours if you want to. I think the pattern is adequately complicated for a few seconds animation just with 2. There's the second blue. As you can see, I've done the same thing again, I've made it a different colour. So you need to go away and do all that. And once you've done it, come back here and add a keyframe for each material for the emit value at the 0. And the way you do that is just to hover your mouse over where it says emit in the material. Make sure the timeline there is on frame 0 or frame 1 and hit the I key. And do that for each of your materials. When you come back into graphs, you'll see this sort of thing. Then go to where it says add modifier. And you want to add the generator, and it's a sine. You want to increase its amplitude so that you're sure to hit 5 and 0 wherever you go. And each one of these peaks obviously is your light turning on and off swing between 5 and 0. We're going to clip it to that in a minute. We're going to limit it, but you just need to make sure those values are there. And you also need to think about the time domain. Now if you look at the scale along the bottom there, you'll see each one of those divisions is 20 frames. So each one of those divisions is it's roughly 1 second. Okay. So this is flashing about 1.5 times a second at the moment. And I've added another modifier called limits, and you set the limits there as 0 and 5 using the right hand 2 boxes, and that's what you get. It's what engineers will call a clipped waveform. Just means that it won't go any higher than 5 or any lower than 0. So you can see what happens as you go from left to right. It turns on, off, on, off, on, off. Okay. Now if each single group does that, and there you are, I've done all of the LEDs, and you can see that kind of superimposition of waveforms faintly in the background there, and you make sure they're all slightly different so they go in constantly changing patterns. Now for the buttons I'm going to use something different. It's still the generator, but I'm using tangent waveform. This produces a very much different waveform, and because out of this I get a square or nearly square waveform, and if you turn it down, because the buttons I don't want to flash very often, I want them to stay on and off. I want them to stay on more than they are off actually. So there we go, and change the offset to raise that ramp up a bit. As you can see, because I want them to stay on more than they are off, I think we need to change the trying to remember how to do it the last time. Yeah. I think the last time I did actually change the amplitude as well. You can see there they're on for a rather ridiculously long length of time. It's going to take a bit of playing around for me to remember what settings I had before. Some of these things you do have to play around a bit. And the other thing to remember is that when we put the limits on here, our top limit is going to be 3 and not 5. So the buttons want to be dimmer, because they're an LED behind them with a silicon keypad over the top, which makes them dimmer. And if you look at a piece of electronic equipment like that, they are quite substantially dimmer. And there you are. That's a clip waveform. It's on most of the time and off for a short time. That's exactly what I was trying to achieve. And if we do something similar for each of our 3 sets of buttons, each of our 3 materials on the buttons, but make sure that they don't coincide, otherwise they're all going to be switching on and off at the same time. We want them all to switch on and off at different times, and ideally to have a bit of odd phasing so that as the simulation proceeds they never quite go into the same sequence. They're always sort of slightly off from each other in one direction or the other. I don't know if I explained that very well, but if you look at the chaotic jumble in the background there, all those lines going everywhere, that is what you want to see. If everything's regimented and in step with each other, you've done something wrong and you need to adjust this here. The phase offset slightly from one waveform to another. It's a shame really they didn't include sort of like a random wave function. They don't seem to have done. That would have been quite good. Maybe there's a note for Blender developers in the future. Random wave function, please. And this one's going to be a bit less on time than the other one, and the same sort of off time, I think, for each flash, that is. We'll clip that down and see what that looks like. There we go. So this one also is on for a long period of time, but it's more frequent flashes, I think, than the last one I did. Yeah. Let's just make it off for a bit longer, otherwise it's just going to flicker. That's better. So that's flashing on and off faster than the last one. I'm just going to put a bit of phase offset on there to make sure that nothing coincides. You can play about with that as much as you like. And remember, these graphs, they're not cast in stone. You can always come back and edit them. If you do the animation, you don't like it, and you think, oh, one light should be flashing faster or slower or whatever, you can always come back and change it. It's no big deal. It's not something like a modifier where you hit apply and that's it, it's done. Well, apart from the fact you can use the undo button. You could come back to this in 6 months' time and change it, as long as you've still got the file, of course. And that's one of the things I like about Blender. What I like to do is I like to create and save certain things. If I've got nothing else to do and I fancy having a play around on Blender, then I'll build what I call a stage, you know, some landscapes and scenery and interior or whatever, somewhere where some action can happen, and I'll use that. Right, so we're done with that, and this is what we've got at the moment. And what I've done is I've applied, while I had it turned off earlier, I've applied some arrays, or rather I've put in some arrays. I've put a linear array in, and also a thing called a curve modifier, which has bent that round into a circle. So now we've got like a circular bank of supercomputers. And I've shifted the camera to an appropriate place. I've put a ground plane in, which is just a glossy reflective black material. And if we do a test render on that in the Mo, see what that looks like. I think I'm going to need to put a ceiling in as well, but I'm not going to put a proper ceiling in. I'm going to go and Google. I'm going to look for a picture of a computer lab. Okay. Maybe not that sort of computer lab. Try a supercomputer lab, not a high school. We might get something a bit more salubrious. Oh, that's better. Right. Yeah, that would be nice, except it's too small. Okay, we want larger images. Where is it? Large, large, large. Okay, so what I'm looking for is a picture with quite a lot of ceiling in, and a ceiling that looks quite good. That looks good. Noah's computers, how's that? We'll have their ceiling in our model. So I'll take that image and save it. Now it's only the ceiling I'm going to use on this. Well, I'll import the whole image, but you won't be able to see it. All you'll see is the ceiling. It just gives a little bit more of realism. And you can do things like this if you can't be bothered to model the whole thing, which you should do really, but hey, this tutorial will take all day. Okay, now I'm going to show you something. There's a nice little add-on. You need to enable it first. I've disabled it from this, so I'll show you how to enable it. So if you go down to user preferences, make sure you're on add-ons, import and export, and what you're looking for is import images as planes, wherever it is. Yep, there it is. And just tick the tick box, and then you can close it. And now if you go to import, you'll see that at the bottom there you've got images as planes. And we'll go to our image directory. We'll find what we just downloaded. I can't remember what it's called. Supercomputer something on that. So it'll be in the S's. And I've got this image directory. I'll just leave alone where I put all the textures and stuff I use in projects and reuse. Right, and you'll find it's imported it, and it will have called it the same file name, so it's easy enough to find. And now what we'll do is we'll just swirl it around so it's into an appropriate orientation. And in fact, if I turned on textured view, we should be able to see the picture because it's UV mapped. It'll be the only UV map texture in this tutorial. And I didn't have to UV map it. That's about right, something like that. I'll turn on textures. It's always worthwhile doing to make sure it's the right way up and the right way around and all the rest of it. And yeah, it's got the ceiling at the top, which is what we want. So all we need to do is scale it up and put it in the appropriate place behind our bank of computers. We don't want to see Noah's computers, we just want to see ours and the ceiling. So now it's just a question of tiddling around and getting it all in the right place and the right rotation, and Bob's your uncle, or auntie as the case may be. Something like that. And it will produce just an illusion of it being inside a room someplace. That's all we're after. I think we either want to move it or scale it. I'll move it, probably scale it down a bit so we've got more ceiling, and it looks, at the moment it looks like it's got a very low ceiling. We can't really raise it up anymore. So the best thing to do is to scale it as tight to our camera view as we can, like this, so we get lots of bits in the ceiling, like so. That should produce quite a nice effect, I think. And this is the material. I'm going to give it some emit. This might be a bit much. I'm also going to turn down the specular and the diffuse shading, and turn off shadows at the bottom here. Now you could make it shadeless, which is what a lot of people do, but then you've got to light it with something, because if you make it shadeless, emit won't work either. So I'd rather have emit working. And here we go. What does it look like? It's a bit bright. I'll have to turn the emit value down for the ceiling at some point. Okay. Also, the material's wrong on the case. It's starting to look a bit like wood, isn't it? It looks like. I'll have to remember that if I ever want to model a piece of furniture in that nice maple grain, then that material would work really well. However, we don't want a maple grain computer, so we'll do something about that. And the other thing we want to do is something about those switches, because they're a bit too bright. They're not, because of their colour, they're not as bright as they. Yeah, make that black and turn down the amount of colour that's being contributed by the texture there. Turn that down a lot, actually. Something like that. Okay. So it's kind of a black glossy metal case to go with the black glossy floor. Right, and our buttons, we'll just turn the limits down to 3 for each button, because they were much too bright. Might even have to turn them down to 1 actually. We'll see. Now, each animation is different, and you always have to go through this sort of phase of playing about and adjusting it and so on, and it can take ages, and I'm hoping it's not going to for this. That's much better. You could practically feel the glare coming off those buttons earlier. Yeah, that's a lot better. That ceiling's too damn bright. So the next thing we need to do is get some down light in there. We need to change our lighting. A bit more light, but not too much. I'm going to try and move that floor around because I want to see if I can get some lights reflected in it as well. So I've kind of tilted it a bit. Sometimes it's worthwhile playing around with things like that. Yes, the floor wouldn't be tilted in real life, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make that work. Okay. Can't see why that shouldn't work. I'll try again. No, it just doesn't want to play. Okay. Get rid of the tilt on the floor. Of course, there's more than one way of skinning a cat. Oops. Adjusting the plane, I didn't really wish to do that. Take that back. See, there's something about this that isn't quite right at the moment. It just doesn't satisfy my aesthetic sensibilities, I guess is one way of putting it. If I kind of bring it back so I can see a bit more. Now the scale of my ceiling's wrong. I have to scale that ceiling plane up again. I'll see if I can get a decent camera angle first. I want to try and get more lights reflected in it. That's better. That's the sort of shot I was hoping for. It's a bit too reflective at the moment, actually. Looks like you've got two computer banks, one on top of the other. So I need to go into the material for the floor and turn the reflectivity down just a little bit. The other thing I could do, I could always do something like that and bend the... No, I don't think that's going to look right either. So look, try and see if I can get the LEDs to reflect in the floor like this. No, it's not happening. Okay, it doesn't look right as well. Interesting effect, but not for me. This is the sort of process you go through, you know. It's worthwhile getting everything set up to your satisfaction before you start to render, because rendering takes a long time. In fact, I fully expect this will take about 1.5 hours to render 120 frames on my computer, possibly a bit longer. So I'm planning to go for lunch when it starts rendering and come back a bit later. And here it is rendered after lunch. Enough flashing lights for anybody. See you another time.